Oyster is the common name for a number of different families of saltwater bivalve mollusks that live in marine or brackish habitats. However, not all oysters are true oysters. A true oyster is a bivalve mollusk, specifically of the family Ostridae, which is characterized by a central adductor muscle, central scar marking its point of attachment, and tends to be irregular in shape. Most edible oysters are true oysters. A number of bivalve mollusks have common names which include the word oyster, usually because they taste like or look like true oysters, or because they yield noticeable pearls. Some examples of these are thorny oysters, pilgrim oysters, saddle oysters, and pearl oysters. Pearl oysters are not closely related to true oysters, being members of the family Pteridae, the feathered oysters. Almost all shell-bearing mollusks can secrete pearls, but most are not very valuable. Pearls can form in both saltwater and freshwater environments. Both cultured pearls and natural pearls can be extracted from pearl oysters, though other mollusks, such as freshwater mussels, also yield pearls of commercial value. The largest pearl-bearing oyster is Pinctada maxima, which is roughly the size of a dinner plate. Not all individual oysters produce pearls naturally. In nature, pearl oysters produce pearls by covering an extremely small object, such as a grain of sand, with a material called nacre, also known commonly as mother of pearl. The invasive object irritates the mollusk, which in turn secretes the nacre to protect its delicate flesh. Over the years, layer upon layer builds up until a pearl is formed. The many different types, colors, and shapes of pearls depend on the natural pigment of the nacre and the shape of the original irritant. Pearl farmers can simulate this natural occurrence by placing an object, usually a piece of polished shell, inside the oyster. Then in 3 to 7 years, the oyster can produce a pearl. These pearls are not as valuable as natural pearls, but look exactly the same. Oysters are filter feeders, drawing water in over their gills through the beating of cilia. Suspended plankton and particles are trapped in the mucus of the gill, and from there are transported to the mouth, where they are eaten, digested, and expelled as feces or pseudofeces. An oyster can filter up to 5 liters of water per hour, and feed most actively at temperatures above 10 degrees Celsius. In addition to their gills, oysters can also exchange gases across their mantles, which are lined with many small, thin-walled blood vessels. A small 3-chambered heart, lying under the adductor muscle, pumps colorless blood to all parts of the body. At the same time, 2 kidneys, located on the underside of the muscle, remove waste products from the blood. Their nervous system includes 2 pairs of nerve cords and 3 pairs of ganglia. A group of oysters is commonly called a bed or oyster reef. As a keystone species, oysters provide habitats for many marine species, such as sea anemones, barnacles, and hooked mussels. They are protandric, which means that they begin life as males, and once mature, will spawn as males by releasing sperm into the water. Then, over the next 2 or 3 years, they will spawn as females by releasing eggs. A single female oyster can produce up to 100 million eggs annually. The eggs become fertilized in the water and develop into larvae. The larvae exist suspended in the water for 2 to 3 weeks before settling on a site. The type of site it attaches to will determine its shape as it matures. Once the larvae attach to a site, they are called spat, and within a year they will reach maturity as an adult oyster. Common oyster predators include crabs, seabirds, starfish, and humans. Oysters are harvested by simply gathering them from their beds. In some areas, a toothed bar attached to a chain bag called a scallop dredge is used. The dredge is towed through an oyster bed by a boat, picking up the oysters in its path. While dredges collect oysters more quickly, they heavily damage the beds, and their use is highly restricted. 2 methods of cultivation are commonly used: release and bagging. In both cases, oysters are cultivated onshore to the size of a spat. The release technique involves distributing the spat throughout existing oyster beds and allowing them to mature naturally and be collected like wild oysters. And the more expensive bagging technique involves putting spat in racks or bags and keeping them above the bottom of the seabed. Harvesting involves simply lifting the bags or rack to the surface and removing the mature oysters. Bivalves, such as oysters, are effective filter feeders and can have large effects on the water columns in which they occur. As filter feeders, oysters remove plankton and organic particles from the water column. Multiple studies have shown that individual oysters are capable of filtering up to 190 litres of water per day, and thus oyster reefs can significantly improve water quality and clarity. It is estimated that 1 acre can produce nearly 750,000 oysters. In many areas, non-native oysters have been introduced in attempts to prop up failing harvests of native varieties. The Oystertecture movement promotes the use of oyster reefs for water purification. An Oystertecture project has been implemented in South Carolina, and currently, for the installation cost of $3,000, roughly 4.8 million litres of water are being filtered daily. However, the movement has come under scrutiny by the Department of Environmental Protection, citing worries that commercial shellfish growers would be at risk, and that members of the public might disregard warnings and consume tainted oysters. Unlike most shellfish, oysters can have a fairly long shelf life of up to 4 weeks. However, their taste becomes less pleasant as they age. Fresh oysters must be alive just before consumption or cooking. Oysters that do not open are generally assumed to be dead before cooking, and therefore unsafe. There is only one criterion to check for life. The oyster must be capable of tightly closing its shell. Open oysters should be tapped on the shell. If alive, they will close up and are safe to eat. Oysters which are open and unresponsive are dead and must be discarded. Some dead oysters may be closed. These make a distinctive noise when tapped and are known as clackers. Oysters can also contain harmful bacteria. As they are filter feeders, they will naturally concentrate anything present in surrounding water. Depuration of oysters is a common industry practice which removes fecal and external contaminants. The oysters are placed into tanks which are pumped with clean water for periods of 48 to 72 hours. This is particularly essential for oysters from coastal waters near highly populated cities which have sewage systems discharging waste nearby, or in the presence of agricultural discharges. Oysters are an excellent source of zinc, iron, calcium, and selenium, as well as vitamin A and vitamin B12. They are also low in calories, with a dozen oysters being only 110 calories. Traditionally, oysters are considered to be an aphrodisiac, particularly because they resemble female sex organs. Researchers have found that they are also rich in amino acids, which trigger increased levels of sex hormones, and their high zinc content aids the production of testosterone. Opening oysters, referred to as oyster shucking, requires skill. The preferred method is to use a special knife with a short and thick blade about 5 centimeters long. Heavy gloves are recommended. Apart from the knife, the shell itself can be razor sharp. Opening or shucking oysters has become a competitive sport. Oyster shucking competitions are staged around the world. The Guinness World Oyster Opening Championship is held in September at the Galway Oyster Festival.